The restaurant was full that evening. The kind of crowd that made the air feel heavy with voices, clinking plates, and quiet laughter. It was one of those places where people came not just to eat, but to be seen. Soft lights hung above polished tables, and every detail was carefully arranged to feel expensive. Servers moved quickly but carefully, balancing trays and polite smiles, knowing that one small mistake could turn into a big problem. Near the center of the room sat a man who clearly stood out. His clothes were sharp. His watch caught the light every time he moved his hand, and the way he leaned back in his chair showed comfort, not manners. He spoke loudly, even when there was no need to. People around him noticed without trying. He had the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. Across the room, a waitress made her way toward his table. She had already been on her feet for hours. Her shoes pressed hard against her soles, and her back ached in a way she had learned to ignore. She carried his order carefully, checking it once more before stepping closer. She knew his table was important. Everyone knew. The manager had already whispered reminders to be extra careful. She placed the plate down gently and asked if everything was all right. First, the man said nothing. He looked at the food as if it had personally offended him. Then he frowned. He pushed the plate slightly away and tapped the table with his fingers. "This isn't what I ordered," he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. The waitress felt her stomach tighten. She looked at the plate again. It was exactly what the ticket said. Still, she apologized right away. She said she would fix it and offered to bring a replacement immediately. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. The man leaned forward now, his voice rising. He began pointing out small things. The temperature of the food. The way it was presented. Even the way she spoke. Each word landed heavier than the last. Some people nearby shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others pretended not to hear, focusing on their own meals. The waitress stood still, hands clasped in front of her, nodding as he spoke. She had learned that reacting only made things worse. She had learned that silence often kept the peace, even when it hurt. Then the man laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was sharp and short. "You people really don't understand respect," he said. "You should learn how to apologize properly." She quietly repeated that she was sorry and reached for the plate to take it back. "Not like that," he said suddenly. Her hand froze mid-air. He looked around the room, making sure others were watching. His guests fell silent. A few tables away, someone stopped chewing. "Kneel," he said. "Then maybe I'll believe you're sorry." The word hung in the air, heavy and unreal. The waitress felt her face burn. For a moment, she thought she had heard wrong. She waited for someone to laugh, to say it was a joke. No one did. The room felt strangely quiet, as if even the music had lowered its volume. I'm sorry," she said softly, hoping he would repeat himself differently. "I said kneel," he replied, his tone calm, almost bored. "If you want to keep your job." Her heart began to race. She could feel eyes on her from every direction. Some faces showed shock. Others showed pity. Many showed nothing at all. The manager stood near the counter, watching but not moving. Fear of losing a wealthy customer held him in place. The waitress swallowed hard. She thought about the bills waiting at home. She thought about how many shifts she had picked up this week alone. She thought about how easily people like him forgot faces like hers. She did not move. The man scoffed. "What's the problem? Is this too much for you?" He leaned back again, crossing his arms, enjoying the control he felt. His guests avoided her eyes. One of them stared into his glass as if hoping to disappear. The waitress took a slow breath. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept them together. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She stood there, small but steady, holding onto the last bit of dignity she had left. Around the room, tension grew thicker. Someone at a nearby table whispered that this had gone too far. Another person looked toward the door, uncomfortable, wishing to leave. But no one spoke up. Silence filled the space where courage should have been. The man clicked his tongue impatiently. "I don't have all night." Time seemed to slow. The waitress felt like the entire world had narrowed to that single moment. Her knees felt weak, but her mind was clear. She knew that once she crossed that line, something inside her would break in a way that could not be fixed. She stayed standing. The man's smile faded. His eyes hardened. He was about to say something else when the sound of the front door opening cut through the tension. A soft chime echoed across the restaurant. Several heads turned at once. The waitress did not look. The man did, and in that instant all the color drained from his face. His confident posture collapsed. His shoulders stiffened. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Whatever power he thought he had just moments ago vanished. The room sensed it immediately. Something had changed. The waitress felt a cold wave of relief mixed with fear as the man's attention shifted. She could still feel the tension in the air, thick enough to press against her chest, but something had changed. She glanced toward the entrance, her heart still hammering, trying to understand who had just walked in and why it had affected him so deeply. For a moment, the restaurant seemed to hold its breath. People stopped talking, utensils hovered above plates, and even the background music seemed distant. All eyes were on the newcomer, though nobody knew exactly why. The man who had demanded she kneel looked smaller somehow, his authority evaporating in an instant. The waitress took a step back from the table, grateful for the pause but uncertain what would happen next. She had learned long ago that the world didn't always reward patience or politeness, but this moment felt different. Something about the energy in the room told her that things were about to shift. As she watched, the newcomer moved with calm purpose. There was no rush, no loud entrance. Every step seemed measured, confident, and quiet. They carried themselves in a way that made it clear they had dealt with difficult situations many times before. Their gaze swept over the room, sharp and observant, noting every detail without needing words. The rich man shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He straightened, trying to regain some control, but the color had drained from his face. The boldness he had worn like armor moments ago had disappeared. His voice, which had been sharp and commanding, now sounded thin and unsure. The waitress allowed herself a tiny breath of hope. She didn't know this person or why they affected him so, but she felt a small spark of courage grow inside her. She could stay standing, at least for now. She could maintain her dignity a little longer. Behind the counter, the manager was fidgeting. He had been frozen in place, unsure whether to intervene earlier. Now, watching the newcomer, he realized that someone else might be taking charge. Relief mixed with anxiety. He knew he should act, but he also sensed that stepping forward might not be necessary anymore. The man's guests looked confused. Their polite smiles had vanished, replaced by nervous curiosity. They followed his gaze to the entrance and then back to the waitress. Whispers ran across tables like a silent wave, each person trying to make sense of the sudden change. It was clear something important was happening, even if no one could put words to it. The waitress remembered the long hours she had worked, the sacrifices she had made, the exhaustion she carried from supporting her family. In her mind, she reviewed each step she had taken to get here. She had trained herself to endure, to stay calm under pressure, to respect people even when they did not respect her. And now, she realized, perhaps that endurance had been noticed in ways she had never imagined. The newcomer paused near the man's table. Their presence alone seemed to command respect without a single harsh word. They glanced at the rich man with a steady, unyielding look, and it became clear why his composure had failed. This was someone he could not intimidate. This was someone who had influence, knowledge, and authority beyond what he had ever encountered. The man's hands tightened on the table, and for the first time he looked unsure. His mouth opened and closed like he was searching for words that would not come. He realized, slowly, that the power he had wielded in the restaurant had limits. Here was a person who could see through his facade, and he was powerless to act. The waitress watched silently, feeling a mixture of fear, relief, and curiosity. She did not move forward, did not speak. She had learned that moments like this required patience. She stayed where she was, holding herself steady, knowing that whatever happened next would define the rest of the evening. The newcomer's eyes finally met hers. There was a brief, almost imperceptible nod, as if acknowledging the ordeal she had faced. No words were spoken, but the gesture carried more reassurance than any sentence could have. In that tiny moment, she felt seen and respected in a way she rarely did. Her confidence grew slightly, enough to steady her hands and calm her racing heart. Around the restaurant, the atmosphere began to shift. Patrons who had been tense with curiosity now leaned forward, sensing that the story unfolding was more than just a scene of rudeness. There was justice in the air, even if subtle. People began to notice that strength could be quiet, and that courage was often invisible until tested. The rich man cleared his throat, trying to assert himself again, but the words faltered. His voice no longer carried the same authority. His gestures, once commanding, now looked desperate and small. He realized that he could not continue with the same tactics he had used before. The room was no longer under his control. The waitress felt a surge of gratitude toward the newcomer, though she didn't fully understand it yet. Their presence alone had altered the balance of power in the room. She realized that sometimes the support of just one person could change everything, even when it seemed impossible. The rich man's eyes flicked back to her, and for a fleeting moment, she saw fear there. He was no longer sure of his status, his influence, or his ability to command obedience. She understood now that he had underestimated the situation entirely. His anger had been strong, but it had not accounted for the possibility of someone stepping in, someone who would not be intimidated. Time seemed to stretch as the restaurant watched silently. The tension was still present, but it had transformed into anticipation. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next, who would speak, and how the events would resolve. It was a strange mix of fear and hope, and it hung over every table, every chair, every patron. The waitress felt her pulse slow slightly as she processed the change. She realized that the ordeal was not over, but the direction had shifted. She no longer felt entirely powerless. There was someone on her side, someone who could influence the situation in ways she could not. That alone was enough to give her courage. The rich man's lips pressed together tightly. He glanced at his guests, then back at the newcomer, and finally, reluctantly, at the waitress. His expression was a mixture of confusion, anger, and an unfamiliar vulnerability. For the first time, he was confronted with the limits of his behavior. No longer could he assume that authority alone would enforce compliance. The newcomer did not speak yet. They stood firm, observing, assessing, letting the rich man feel the weight of his actions. Every second stretched, building the suspense in a way that everyone in the room could feel. Even the music seemed to wait. The waitress remained standing, composed but aware of every heartbeat, every whisper, every glance. She had faced insults and commands before, but never with someone watching who had the power to intervene. The experience was surreal. Her exhaustion, her fear, her worry for her job, all of it combined into a sharp focus that kept her alert and present. Gradually, the rich man leaned back, his posture no longer confident. He began to realize that the dynamics had changed, and that whatever came next would not favor him. The room had shifted, even if subtly, toward a new balance of power. The newcomer finally moved closer to the table. Their presence was calm, deliberate, and unyielding. They looked at the rich man, and their gaze carried authority without a single word. It was clear that any further attempts at intimidation would fail. The waitress felt a wave of relief, knowing that the nightmare might be ending, and dignity could be restored. For the first time that evening, she allowed herself to breathe a little more freely. She knew the ordeal was not completely over, but the scale had tipped in a way that offered hope. Strength, patience, and courage had met force and arrogance, and for now, they were holding their ground. And in that quiet, tense, and extraordinary moment, the waitress understood something essential. Sometimes, standing still and keeping one's dignity could be more powerful than bending to fear. And sometimes, a single presence, calm and certain, could change everything in ways that words never could. The newcomer's steps were steady, quiet, and deliberate. Every eye in the restaurant followed them as they approached the table. Patrons shifted in their chairs, sensing the weight of the moment. Some of them leaned forward, barely daring to breathe, as if the outcome of this encounter might affect them in ways they could not yet understand. The rich man straightened, trying to regain a sense of control. He cleared his throat, hoping to speak, but the words seemed to vanish before they reached his lips. His confidence was gone, replaced by a creeping uncertainty. He had faced people before, yes, and most had cowered or complied. But this was different. The presence before him carried authority, calmness, and an unmistakable strength that made his usual tactics useless. The waitress stayed where she was, still standing. Her hands were no longer trembling as much. A strange sense of reassurance had washed over her, though she still felt the pulse of adrenaline in her veins. She had learned to survive difficult situations before, but this was new. She did not yet know what would happen, but she knew she did not have to face it alone. The newcomer stopped near the table, their gaze sweeping over the rich man and then briefly acknowledging the waitress. It was a subtle nod, almost imperceptible, but it carried more meaning than words. The waitress felt a surge of gratitude and quiet pride. Someone had seen the injustice of the situation. Someone had come to make it right. The rich man's guests shifted in their seats. Their eyes darted between him and the newcomer. They could feel the change in energy in the room, but they did not yet understand it. One of them whispered something quietly, but even their words could not break the tension. The rich man's composure was already cracking, and every second felt heavier than the last. The newcomer finally spoke, their voice calm but firm. They did not shout, did not command. They simply stated facts, observations, and expectations. Every word carried weight because it came from someone who knew authority without needing to prove it through fear or intimidation. The rich man's face turned pale as he listened. His lips pressed together, then quivered. He tried to interrupt, but the newcomer's calm presence silenced him without any effort. The restaurant felt alive with tension. Patrons who had been watching silently now exchanged glances, realizing that something remarkable was unfolding. The waiter at a nearby table dropped a napkin, and for a moment, no one noticed. The silence around the rich man's table was absolute, as if the room itself was holding its breath. The waitress felt her heart slowing slightly. She realized that the newcomer was not just there to witness. They were there to intervene, to correct the wrong that had been done. And even though she did not yet know the full story, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had endured fear, humiliation, and pressure, and now someone had arrived who could shift the balance. The rich man's hands gripped the edge of the table. His knuckles were white, and his chest rose and fell with nervous energy. He tried to speak again, but the words were weak, stumbling over themselves. He had expected compliance, but now he faced a presence he could not intimidate. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had miscalculated, and the consequences were beginning to show. The newcomer looked directly at him, their eyes steady, unwavering. It was clear that they were not impressed by wealth or status. They did not flinch at his attempt to assert authority. Instead, they remained calm, assessing, observing, and letting the truth of his actions sink in. The rich man's arrogance began to crumble under the weight of their silent judgment. The waitress could hardly believe the change she was witnessing. In moments, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The rich man who had demanded her humiliation was now the one shrinking under scrutiny. Every gesture he made, every attempt at control was met with quiet strength. She felt a mix of relief, gratitude, and awe. Patrons around the room began to react, some whispering in disbelief, others simply watching. The manager at the counter finally took a step forward, realizing that the situation was no longer his responsibility alone. He did not speak, but his presence acknowledged the newcomer's authority. The restaurant, once tense and oppressive, now felt like it was waiting for justice to be served. The rich man's lips pressed into a thin line. He shifted in his seat, attempting to appear composed, but the effort failed. His arrogance had been stripped away, replaced by a raw vulnerability. He glanced at his guests, hoping for support, but their faces mirrored the same confusion and unease. No one seemed willing to defend him, and he realized that his usual power no longer held. The newcomer's attention shifted briefly to the waitress. They nodded subtly, signaling that they understood her ordeal and recognized her dignity. Though they said nothing aloud, the gesture was profound. She felt seen, respected, and affirmed. It was a reminder that even in the face of cruelty, her strength had not gone unnoticed. The rich man's voice finally broke, trembling slightly as he tried to regain control. But the room no longer responded to him with fear or obedience. The newcomer's calm authority had changed the dynamic completely. The weight of his actions, his arrogance, and his disregard for others' dignity now pressed down on him, undeniable and inescapable. The restaurant remained silent, every patron attuned to the unfolding events. The tension was palpable, yet it carried a different energy now, one of anticipation and revelation rather than oppression. The rich man realized he had misjudged the situation entirely. He had assumed power came from fear, money, and status. He now understood that real influence came from respect, integrity, and the courage to stand for what was right. The waitress took a steadying breath. She realized that this moment, though terrifying, was also transformative. She had endured, remained composed, and now witnessed the shift in power and justice unfold. Her confidence, once fragile, felt stronger. She knew she had survived not because she was small or weak, but because she had remained true to herself. The newcomer finally spoke again, addressing the rich man directly. Their words were measured, clear, and undeniable. They pointed out the inappropriateness of his actions, the need for accountability, and the importance of treating others with respect. The richness of their presence did not intimidate with wealth or status. It commanded with morality and integrity. The rich man's reaction was immediate. His face went pale, his posture slumped, and his attempts at argument faltered. Every patron watching could see the shift, authority once assumed now challenged and overturned. The weight of the situation pressed on him, a reminder that behavior has consequences, even when power seems absolute. The waitress allowed herself a quiet smile. She felt gratitude toward the newcomer, though she did not yet know their full story. Their presence had changed everything, demonstrating that courage and integrity can arrive at the most unexpected moments. She realized that while fear might be present, it could be met with calm strength, and injustice could be confronted without violence. Time seemed to stretch, every second filled with the tension of revelation. The rich man, once imposing and certain, now seemed fragile. His arrogance had been dismantled not with force, but with presence, observation, and unwavering morality. The power balance had shifted entirely, and the restaurant, once a stage for humiliation, had become a place of quiet reckoning. The waitress took another deep breath, letting herself absorb the moment. She had endured, survived, and now witnessed something extraordinary. A single presence had altered the course of events, demonstrating that courage, calm, and integrity could overcome arrogance and cruelty. The experience left her with a sense of hope, a reminder that even the smallest person can be recognized, respected, and protected when the right force is present. The rich man's eyes flicked nervously, searching for some foothold, some way to regain control, but the moment had passed. The newcomer's quiet authority left no space for manipulation or intimidation. The patrons, once silent observers, now understood that they were witnessing the limits of power and the inevitability of accountability. The waitress felt a quiet pride. She had maintained her dignity, and now she saw the consequences of the rich man's behavior unfold before her. She realized that sometimes the world shifts not through loud confrontation, but through calm presence, moral courage, and recognition of what is right. The shift in power was complete, and for the first time that evening, she felt a sense of safety, respect, and affirmation. The newcomers stood firm, their presence commanding yet calm. Every eye in the restaurant was drawn to them, sensing that this was the turning point everyone had been waiting for. The rich man, who only moments ago had wielded power with arrogance and entitlement, now appeared small, uncertain, and exposed. His confident posture had vanished, replaced by tension and fear. The newcomer spoke, their voice steady and clear. They addressed the rich man directly, recounting the situation and pointing out the inappropriateness of his behavior. They explained that no one deserved humiliation, and that treating someone with disrespect did not show power. It showed weakness. The words were simple but precise, cutting through the rich man's usual defenses. The rich man opened his mouth, likely to argue, but he found no words that could match the calm authority before him. His face paled, and his usual gestures of dominance faltered. Every patron in the restaurant could see it. The power dynamic had reversed. For the first time, the rich man was the one being judged, and he had no escape. The waitress watched, her chest tightening and then relaxing slightly. She had endured fear, humiliation, and pressure, and now she saw the balance shifting. The newcomer's presence was not just about confronting the rich man, it was about restoring dignity. She felt a quiet sense of relief and gratitude, realizing that someone had finally recognized the injustice she had endured. The rich man's guests exchanged nervous glances. Some shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, sensing the gravity of the moment. Others looked down at their hands, as if hoping to disappear. The silence around the table was absolute, broken only by the newcomer's calm voice and the faint hum of the restaurant's background noise. "Power is not in fear or control," the newcomer said, looking directly at the rich man. "It is in respect, in integrity, and in how you treat others. The way you spoke and commanded just now shows the opposite. It shows fear of being seen for who you truly are." The rich man's eyes darted around the room, searching for some form of support or escape, but there was none. His guests looked uneasy. The manager remained silent but attentive, and the patrons watched with growing awareness. The situation he had tried to control had slipped entirely out of his hands. The waitress felt her shoulders relax slightly. She had faced cruelty before, but never in such a public way. Seeing the rich man's arrogance crumble under calm observation and moral authority was unexpected and powerful. She felt a new sense of confidence. She had not bowed, she had not complied, and now the truth of her strength was evident to everyone. The newcomer continued, their voice firm but not loud. They explained that humiliation and fear have no place in a civilized environment, and that demanding such acts from anyone is unacceptable. The words were precise, yet delivered with a calm energy that made resistance seem impossible. The rich man's attempts at dominance had been stripped away without the need for anger or confrontation. The room's atmosphere shifted entirely. Patrons who had been tense and unsure now felt the weight of justice. Even the manager, who had been hesitant to intervene earlier, felt a quiet sense of approval. The situation, once threatening and oppressive, had transformed into a lesson in accountability and integrity. The rich man's posture slumped. His hands, once gesturing confidently, now rested limply on the table. He realized that he had been exposed, not just to the people in the restaurant, but to the truth of his own behavior. His arrogance had been challenged, and the result was unmistakable. He was no longer in control. The waitress watched silently, her heart pounding. She felt a mixture of relief, pride, and amazement. The newcomer's presence had changed everything. No longer was she the one facing fear alone. The power of calm authority, integrity, and moral courage had shifted the entire situation. The rich man's voice trembled as he tried to speak again. I didn't mean." The newcomer did not interrupt but allowed the silence to emphasize the weight of his actions. The words hung in the air, unfinished and weak. His usual confidence had been replaced by the awareness of his own wrongdoing. The room seemed to lean in, collectively acknowledging the shift in balance. The waitress felt a quiet sense of affirmation. She had remained composed, had not allowed fear to dictate her actions, and now she witnessed justice in motion. The newcomer's intervention showed that cruelty could be confronted without aggression, and that standing up for oneself could inspire correction and respect. The rich man looked around, hoping for some sign of support from his guests, but found none. Their faces reflected uncertainty, unease, and perhaps a growing realization that the man they had followed in arrogance was flawed. Even the manager, who had previously feared losing a customer, now observed with restrained approval. The newcomer's authority was undeniable. For the first time that evening, the rich man felt small. He had expected obedience, compliance, and submission. Instead, he faced a calm authority that demanded reflection and accountability. The energy in the room, once heavy with tension, now carried a quiet resolution. The newcomer finally turned their attention back to the waitress. Their subtle nod conveyed acknowledgement, understanding, and respect. The gesture, though small, spoke volumes. The waitress felt her confidence grow slightly, strengthened by the validation of her endurance and dignity. Patrons around the restaurant began to sense the lesson unfolding. The quiet authority and moral courage of the newcomer had reshaped the environment. Fear, once used as a tool of control, had been replaced by the understanding that respect and integrity hold far greater power. The rich man slumped further, realizing that his usual tactics would not work here. His arrogance had been dismantled by calm observation, clear words, and the undeniable presence of someone who demanded accountability. The weight of the moment pressed upon him, and he felt the consequences of his behavior in a way he had never experienced before. The waitress allowed herself a small smile. She had survived the ordeal, and now she witnessed the rich man's behavior corrected through quiet, firm intervention. She understood that courage, patience, and integrity had shifted the balance of power. Her dignity, once threatened, was now recognized, and she felt a renewed sense of strength. The newcomer's voice carried one final message, calm and unwavering. They emphasized that respect, kindness, and moral courage define true strength, and that the rich man's actions were a lesson in what happens when arrogance and cruelty are unchecked. The words were simple but profound, leaving a lasting impression on everyone in the room. The rich man's expression was one of resignation. He understood that he had been challenged in a way he could not escape. The balance of power had shifted, and the lesson was clear. Authority without respect is fragile, and cruelty without accountability has consequences. The waitress felt a sense of closure in the moment. She had endured, remained composed, and now witnessed justice unfold. The newcomer's presence had not only changed the dynamic but had restored dignity, taught accountability, and reaffirmed the importance of courage and respect. The room slowly returned to normal, but the impact of the events lingered. Patrons who had witnessed the confrontation carried with them the lesson that true strength lies in integrity, patience, and the willingness to stand for what is right. The rich man, once commanding and arrogant, had been humbled and confronted with the consequences of his actions. The waitress allowed herself a deep breath. She had faced fear, humiliation, and pressure, and now she stood with renewed confidence. She had not bowed, had not complied with unjust demands, and had witnessed the power of calm authority. The moment was transformative, and she knew she would carry the lesson with her. Dignity, courage, and respect can prevail even in the face of arrogance and intimidation. The restaurant had quieted down, but the energy in the air was thick with what had just unfolded. Patrons who had been tense or curious now leaned back in their chairs, exchanging glances that reflected both relief and admiration. The rich man, once commanding and intimidating, sat at the table with his head slightly lowered, the full weight of the situation finally pressing down on him. He had been humbled, confronted by the truth of his own behavior, and there was no escape from the consequences of the arrogance he had displayed. The waitress felt her body relax for the first time that evening. She had endured a trial that could have crushed her confidence, but now she felt an inner strength grow. The presence of the newcomer had shifted everything. They had seen her ordeal, acknowledged her courage, and restored dignity in a way that words alone could never achieve. She realized that sometimes, help comes when it is needed most, even from unexpected sources. The newcomer moved slightly, giving the waitress a reassuring glance, a silent message that she had done nothing wrong and had maintained her honor. There was no grand declaration, no applause, but the weight of their presence spoke louder than any words. The room seemed to settle into a new rhythm, a quiet acknowledgement that justice had been served in its own calm, powerful way. The rich man's guests fidgeted, their faces a mix of confusion, unease, and newfound understanding. They realized, perhaps for the first time, that respect is not something to be demanded, it is something to be earned. And when arrogance crosses the line into cruelty, even wealth and status cannot protect someone from the consequences of their actions. The manager finally exhaled, moving from his previous hesitation to a quiet confidence. He approached the waitress and spoke softly, acknowledging her patience and composure. It was a small gesture, but in that moment it meant a great deal. He had witnessed courage in the face of intimidation, and it left a lasting impression on him. The rich man remained seated, his usual confidence gone, replaced by a silent understanding of his own misjudgment. He avoided eye contact with the waitress and even with the newcomer, knowing that the lesson had been delivered without the need for confrontation. The weight of accountability had fallen squarely on his shoulders, and he could no longer hide behind wealth or authority. Patrons began to return to their meals, but the atmosphere had changed. Conversations resumed, but they were quieter, more reflective. People were processing what they had seen. A moment where humility, courage, and integrity had prevailed over fear, arrogance, and entitlement. The lesson lingered in the air like an unspoken truth that everyone could feel. The waitress took a slow breath, letting herself feel the calm after the storm. She had faced an ordeal that tested her patience, strength, and dignity, and now she saw the outcome. It was not about winning or losing. It was about being seen, respected, and recognized for maintaining composure in the face of cruelty. She realized that true power lies not in demanding submission, but in maintaining integrity even when threatened. The newcomer finally turned and walked toward the exit. Their steps were quiet, deliberate, and unhurried. They had done what was needed without fanfare, without seeking attention, and without turning the moment into spectacle. Their presence had been enough. The lesson was delivered, and the room had felt the shift. Patrons watched them leave with a mix of awe and gratitude, understanding that they had witnessed something extraordinary. The rich man remained at the table, still processing what had happened. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that fear and intimidation are fragile tools. They can crumble in the face of calm authority and moral courage. The realization left him silent, his mind turning over every action, every word, and every moment that had led to his own public humiliation. The waitress felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had endured the impossible, stood her ground, and now witnessed justice unfold without needing to fight back aggressively. It was a lesson in resilience, patience, and dignity. She understood that strength does not always roar. Sometimes, it is quiet, steady, and unyielding. As the evening went on, the restaurant slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Patrons continued with their meals, but there was a subtle change in how people carried themselves. The air held a sense of respect, reflection, and awareness. Everyone had witnessed the importance of treating others with dignity, and the lesson lingered like a quiet reminder of what matters most. The rich man eventually rose, his movements careful and deliberate. He avoided speaking, perhaps understanding that apologies or words would not erase the moment entirely. The humility he displayed, though reluctant, was a step toward acknowledging the consequences of his behavior. He left the restaurant with a quiet presence, a stark contrast to the arrogance he had carried in. The waitress returned to her duties, her hands steady, her confidence restored. She had survived the ordeal, maintained her integrity, and witnessed a profound lesson in justice and humility. The presence of the newcomer had shown her that even the smallest act of patience, courage, and dignity can shift power in unexpected ways. The manager gave her a small nod, acknowledging her composure and strength. It was a quiet moment, but it carried weight. In a world where people often face challenges beyond their control, being recognized for maintaining dignity is a rare and valuable affirmation. The patrons slowly finished their meals, leaving the restaurant with a sense of reflection. They had observed something extraordinary, a moment where courage and integrity triumphed over arrogance and cruelty. The lesson would linger in their minds, shaping their understanding of respect, humility, and accountability. The waitress stood for a moment, looking around the restaurant. The space that had been filled with tension, fear, and anticipation was now calm and balanced. She realized that she had been part of a profound lesson, not just for herself but for everyone who had witnessed the event. The shift in power, the restoration of dignity, and the quiet delivery of justice had left a lasting impression. As the night continued, she returned to her work with a renewed sense of purpose. The ordeal had tested her in ways she never expected, but it had also revealed her own strength. She understood now that true courage is not always visible, and true power is not always loud. Sometimes, it is the quiet, steady, and morally grounded actions that create the most profound impact. The restaurant returned to its usual rhythm, but the events of the evening remained. The rich man had been humbled, the waitress had been recognized, and the newcomer had demonstrated the quiet strength of moral courage. The story, though unspoken, would linger in the hearts and minds of everyone present. It was a reminder that dignity, respect, and integrity are the true measures of character. The waitress finally allowed herself a deep breath, feeling a sense of closure. She had endured fear, maintained composure, and witnessed justice without aggression. The evening had taught her a valuable lesson. Courage, patience, and integrity can prevail even in the face of arrogance and intimidation. The power of standing firm, of being seen and acknowledged, and of witnessing truth unfold is a lesson that will stay with her forever.